We are joined now by Miranda Devine, who should get all the Pulitzers that the Washington Post and the New York Times got for untruthful stories, as more evidence, as if we needed it, rolls in that the Hunter Biden laptop was 100% real. She broke the story with the New York Post in October of 2020. She has told us everything about this case. We've been discussing it for a long time. Miranda, when this news came down about Hunter Biden and the sweetheart deal, your first thought was what?
Well, I wasn't surprised. We've been waiting for this to happen, and I think that it was expedited by the fact that the IRS supervisory agent who was in charge of that Hunter Biden case in Delaware is he's already testified before before Congress in the private testimony, and I think that testimony is bombshell. And it will be released pretty soon. So I think they had to get out in front of that. And anyway, we knew last month that the DOJ had fired the entire investigatory team that worked under the supervisory agent, Gary Shapley. They'd removed them from the case. And so what does that tell you? It tells you that they had no intention of continuing on and trying to bring anything more than a slap on the wrist for Hunter Biden.
Hey, Miranda, it's Buck. I see this and I think, well, first of all, I think when you've been with us before, we talked about how the sweetheart deal was the only way that it seemed the Biden family was going to go on this one. But is it over? Meaning, are they going to try to now use this as a tool, leverage, at least in a PR sense, to say, okay, Hunter, he's taken his lumps, and therefore there's no need to look into, was there actually a bribe scheme directly to Joe and Hunter was the pass-through? I mean, how do you see that part of it playing out?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you're already seeing that in the Washington Post and particularly in the New York Times, where they make allowances for poor Hunter because he had a drug problem and, that's not unusual. Other people managed to do plea deals because they had drug problems, which is not entirely true. There's a rapper called Kodak Black who's one of many people who ended up going to jail. He went to jail for 4 years. On federal charges of lying on a gun application. And Alan Weisselberg, famously the 75-year-old former CFO of the Trump organization, spent 3 months on Rikers because he didn't report some perks that he got from Donald Trump on his tax form. So, it's a completely different way of handling Hunter Biden. But even so, we're seeing the massaging of the narrative by those friendly outlets, and that's what they're saying. And they're saying that poor Hunter, he didn't know what he was doing at the time because he was drug-addled. And anyway, it has absolutely nothing to do with Joe Biden, no mention of bribery charges, no mention of anything else. But it doesn't make any difference because ultimately the story is not really about Hunter Biden. It's about Joe Biden. And more importantly, I think it's about the cover-up by the FBI and the CIA and the DOJ to try and cover up, their cover-up of Joe Biden's involvement in his family's influence peddling scheme.
Okay, I bet you're really I'm fired up as a lawyer because the essence of any republic is trust in the Justice Department and the fact that, look, if Donald Trump had gotten a sweetheart deal and, he pleads guilty to a misdemeanor instead of Jack Smith throwing the book at him and trying to put him in prison for the rest of his life, and then they also come out and Hunter Biden gets a sweetheart deal, I would say, well, this, look, super rich people and super well-connected people have long had favorable treatments from the Justice Department and the judicial system in general. That's different, though, than what we're getting. We're getting them trying to put Donald Trump in prison for the rest of his life for relatively inconsequential, in the grand scheme of things, I believe, crimes. Far more, if you look at that laptop, consequential crimes committed by Hunter Biden, in my mind, and he gets off with a sweetheart deal. How broken is the justice system in your mind, Miranda? And if you're a low-level FBI agent or if you're a low-level Department of Justice employee and you went to either organization to try to bring justice in an unjust world, how furious would you be at the world that you now live in?
Well, they are furious. The line agents are disgusted and dismayed. The former agents are so appalled about the reputational damage that has been done to their bureau in the last few years. And you know, Gary Shapley, who was the supervisory IRS agent, he's not a partisan. He has just been absolutely world-class at his job investigating tax fraud. And, you know, last October, he complained to U.S. Attorney David Weiss about the stonewalling, the slow walking, and the outright obstruction that he was meeting from the DOJ. And what happens? Nothing. He then blows the whistle. He testifies before Congress privately, and then his entire team of 12 people gets taken off the case. People who are working that case from the beginning, from 2018. And, you know, initially when they were looking at this case, they were looking at Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. They were looking at FARA violations, which, remember, have put members of Donald Trump's team in jail, like Paul Manafort. It's so dirty. It's just as well that Merrick Garland is in Stockholm at the moment, and it's kind of ironic because he is a victim of Stockholm Syndrome. His reputation is forever damaged. He will go down in history as an Attorney General who was compromised by the president, and his entire DOJ stands condemned by history as well. And it's this just is a political fix, because otherwise Joe Biden was going to pardon his son, because there was no way that Hunter was ever going to spend a day in jail, even though, you know, his former business partners, people like Devin Archer, is just about to go to jail. There's just rack and ruin and disaster all around Hunter Biden. But Hunter, nothing ever happens to Hunter. And so this saves Joe Biden the embarrassment, the political embarrassment of having to pardon his son, which is what he would have done.
Speaking of Miranda Devine of the New York Post, her book, Laptop from Hell, was really the ultimate deep dive into all of this. And now we see some degree of, well, the sweetheart deal resolution to this, not resolution in a good way. Miranda, what do you think comes next? I mean, I guess there's a part of me that hopes some statute of limitation issues may come into play. So from a criminal justice perspective, it may not be that straightforward. But if you get a Republican president and a willingness to look into this, do you think we could still find out what 10% for the big guy really means? That's fundamentally for me the question that I'm grappling with today.
Yes. Well, I mean, interesting that the grand jury in Delaware actually did ask at least one witness who is the big guy. So, if they bothered pulling on those strings, if they bothered looking at the form, the FD 1023 form that's been in the news lately that James Comer finally managed to extract from the FBI that made those allegations of $10 million in bribes going to Hunter and his father, Joe Biden, when he was vice president, from Ukraine. If they bothered to look at any of that, we might have seen something more, but they haven't. There's just a little line in U.S. Attorney David Weiss's statement on this, in which he says that the investigation is still ongoing. But I think you can take that in a cynical sense, which is not that they are going to try to pursue any of those matters that I just mentioned, particularly to do with Joe Biden, but simply that saying that the investigation is ongoing is another way of stonewalling James Comer and Chuck Grassley and Jim Jordan and any other of the Republicans who are trying to get to the bottom of this influence peddling operation, particularly because now Joe Biden is the president, and all those millions of dollars that went to his family, you have to ask, was he compromised in the eyes of China or Russia or Ukraine? Ukraine, where we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars to continue this war. So there's a lot at stake from a national security viewpoint. We just saw Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, go to China and kowtow in a humiliating way before President Xi, make all sorts of concessions. How much of that is kind of real politic, and how much of it is a factor of this influence peddling scheme in which China paid tens of millions of dollars to the Biden family, not just Joe Biden's son Hunter, but his brother Jim Biden as well. And we know that Joe Biden was involved in that scheme because he met with at least a dozen of Hunter Biden's business partners, including in Beijing.
Miranda, last question for you, and we appreciate you making the time today. One, do you feel any vindication? Because for a lot of people, Hunter Biden didn't do anything. Joe Biden's been saying his son is, above reproach. Well, now he's pled guilty on some level, even if it is a sweetheart deal, to 3 different charges. Second, what does this do for 2024? There is some suggestion out there that, now this is a sweetheart deal because Biden's not going to run. Do you buy into any of that, or do you think this makes Biden more likely to run?
On the latter, I don't think it has any impact one way or the other, but on whether he runs. But I think it does just cement the view that is becoming an increasing opinion in the public, in the voters' mind, that there is this unfair dual system of justice, one for the Biden family and their Democratic allies, and another for Donald Trump and his allies. Look, as far as you're right, the fact that that Hunter Biden has pled guilty to at least something shows that what the president's, my son did nothing wrong defense, it was just a joke. I mean, so much for that. It was improper of Joe Biden to make those comments because, of course, he's Merrick Garland's boss, and Merrick Garland is David Weiss's boss. So it was kind of clear the way this was going to go. But it's still just very disappointing that we have a Department of Justice that's so compromised.
No doubt. Miranda Devine deserves all the Pulitzers. Thank you for all the work. Thank you for making the time today. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, guys.